The morning light poured through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow on the marble countertops, making everything look pristine perfect, almost like a photo from an expensive magazine. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the coffee maker, brewing my favorite blend. The kind Patrick always complained about. He said it was too strong, too bitter, but it was exactly how I liked it. I paused for a moment, watching the steam rise from my mug, filling the room with that comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee. I was home from a business trip to Seattle, my first in months. I'd worked hard for this moment, building my empire, my sustainable fashion line that had taken off, now even reaching markets in Asia. But all that seemed so small in this moment. I stepped into the kitchen, expecting to see my husband, Patrick, lounging around like he always did before his morning meetings. Instead, my eyes locked onto a scene that made my chest tighten. There, sitting at the kitchen counter, was Amanda. She was wearing my robe. My silk anniversary robe, the one I'd bought for myself after our first real success, my first business deal that finally proved I wasn't just a hobbyist. It was my gift to me. And there she was, Amanda, sipping my coffee, holding my mug. The same one I had bought in Paris, the one Patrick always said was too fancy. Her lips curved into a smile, not even acknowledging me when I walked in. She looked too comfortable in my space, too comfortable in my life. "Morning, Allison," Amanda said casually, her voice dripping with a sense of ownership. She didn't even look up from her phone. Her nails, perfectly manicured, flicked across the screen of her phone as she took another sip of my coffee. Patrick walked into the room then, adjusting his tie like we were going about our usual morning routine. But this time, the air felt different. The light seemed colder, sharper, as if the house itself knew that everything was about to change. "You're back," Patrick said, his voice detached, corporate. He didn't even look at me like he'd missed me. "We need to talk," he added, his eyes focused on the morning paper in his hand, as if nothing had shifted in the slightest. I nodded, the familiar feeling of calm settling over me. It was like my body knew exactly what to do in this moment. I'd known this day would come. I had been preparing for it, quietly, silently, for years. Patrick had no idea how much time I'd spent building something that was mine. My gaze lingered on Amanda, still sitting there, acting like she had every right to be here. She looked so relaxed, so smug, as if she were already living in my skin, my life, my house. "Look, Allison," Patrick said, setting the paper down, finally meeting my eyes. "I know this is hard, but you need to understand. Amanda and I have been seeing each other for some time now. We're moving forward." I smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that didn't reach my eyes, but it was real. The kind of smile that was genuinely amused by the audacity of it all. "You have two options," he continued, as if he were making an important business decision. "You can accept this arrangement. Amanda will be living here with me, and we'll all coexist as civilized adults. Or you can leave. Leave with what you brought into this marriage, your clothes, your jewelry. Everything else stays here." I just stared at him. He didn't know, did he? He had no clue. 48 hours, I said, my voice low and calm. "That's all you have." Patrick blinked, his face slightly puzzled. Amanda, on the other hand, seemed to relax further into my robe, her eyes flicking up at me in mock sympathy. I wasn't sure if she was pretending to pity me or if she really believed she was winning. "I'll need 48 hours, I repeated, as if we were discussing the logistics of a business deal. Patrick's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, 48 hours? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my coffee mug in hand. There was no point in explaining. They'd find out soon enough. In 48 hours, everything would change. They were playing a game, but I'd been playing the long game. And now it was time for me to make my move. The perfect family image. In the years before this moment, everything had looked perfect. Picture perfect. Patrick, my husband, was the man everyone envied, successful, well-dressed, charming. We had the kind of life people dreamed about, a beautiful home in a prestigious neighborhood, fancy dinner parties, and vacations in places like Paris, Rome, and the Hamptons. We'd met in college. Patrick was a bright-eyed finance major, already aiming for the top. I was the daughter of a single mother, someone who'd always been overlooked. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how smart I was the girl who didn't quite belong. Patrick, on the other hand, was destined for greatness, or so everyone told me. I guess I just wanted to be part of that world, wanted to be the woman who stood beside him as he climbed higher. But as Patrick's career soared, I was left behind in more ways than one. Patrick had always been busy. So busy with work, with his career, that he never bothered to ask me what I was doing. He never asked about the packages that arrived daily at our house, the late nights I spent working from my laptop, the phone calls with manufacturers in Vietnam, or the deals I was quietly closing. Instead, he'd make offhand comments at dinner parties. "Oh, Allison has a little online thing," he'd say, air quoting thing like it didn't matter. As if I were just filling time, not building a business worth millions. And it wasn't just business. It was my entire life. My friends were always wives of other investors, women who measured their worth by their husband's success, by the size of their kitchen renovations, and the cost of their tennis bracelets. They'd laugh about how rich their husbands were while I quietly watched. The irony wasn't lost on me. Each of my country club lunches was more of an exercise in restraint. I had more money coming in each month from my small business than most of these women's husbands made in a year. But Patrick would always claim the credit, always act like his success was the only thing that mattered. I smiled politely, of course, as I listened to their endless chatter about home renovations and charity events. But inside, I was building something of my own, something that would change everything. Early cracks. The cracks in our marriage were small at first, just whispers and fragments of things I refused to acknowledge. The new cologne, the designer gym clothes, the phone that was always by his side, never left out of sight. It wasn't until I found the text from Amanda, long after they'd already started their affair, that I knew for sure. Patrick had been lying, not just to me but to everyone. But I kept quiet. I didn't want to confront him, not yet. Confrontation would have meant defeat, and I wasn't ready for that. I had been silently collecting information, texts, emails, receipts, contracts. Every move they made, I documented it all. The power was in the silence, the information, the patience. As I walked upstairs to my room, leaving them to their smug little breakfast in my kitchen, I couldn't help but smile again. 48 hours, I whispered to myself. That was all it would take to dismantle everything they thought they had. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you space to work in silence. No one expects anything from you, which means you can build quietly, without interruption. Patrick never paid attention to me, and that turned out to be the best gift he could have given me. I had room to grow, to create something that was mine. I'd been building an empire while he was busy doing whatever it is men like him do when they think they're important. It started small, like everything good does. I remember the first day I made my first sale online. It was a little sustainable clothing item, a simple dress, nothing fancy. I was still working full-time, still playing the role of the perfect wife, but when Patrick would leave for work, I'd sneak into the spare room, the one he called my craft corner. He never cared about it. In fact, when anyone asked about my side hustle, he'd laugh and say, "Allison's got a little online thing," making air quotes like it was some harmless distraction. But it wasn't a distraction, it was my future. The first month, I made $200. The second month, $2,000, then $5,000, and after a while, I didn't need to worry about hiding it anymore. Patrick was so consumed by his work, he didn't even know how much money was coming in. He didn't notice the parcels arriving at the door or the invoices that were piling up in my office. He didn't notice that I was making more in a month than he was making in a quarter. I kept it to myself, though. I didn't want to make waves. Patrick had always been the breadwinner. That was his role, his identity. He worked hard for it, and I was the one who supported him in everything. But deep down, I knew I was building something bigger, something he would never notice until it was too late. The shift in Patrick's attitude. As my business grew, so did the cracks in our marriage. Patrick started to change, but I didn't want to believe it. He started coming home late more often. New cologne, the kind that was too expensive to ignore. Designer gym clothes that replaced his usual college t-shirts. And his phone, it was always on him. It wasn't until one late night, after another too long day at the office, that I found a message. It was from Amanda. She had sent a text that night while I was visiting my mother. "Emergency session tonight. Can't wait to see you." It didn't register at first. Emergency session, they had never talked like this before, but then the pieces started to click. the whispers, the phone calls, the late nights. The gym. Amanda wasn't just a Pilates instructor, she was becoming something much more than that. I didn't say anything to Patrick, at least not yet. I just sat there in the living room, looking at the screen, my fingers curling around my phone as if I could somehow grasp the full weight of what this all meant. The man I had been married to for over 8 years, the one who promised me everything, was with her. And I had known about it for months, but I had never had the courage to confront him. Why? Because I was scared of losing everything. But I wasn't a fool. The country club, the masked life. The weekends were always the same. Every Thursday, we'd attend country club lunches with the other investment wives. We all sat at the same table, our husbands' faces etched with success. The women all spoke the same language: social climbing, charity events, expensive handbags, and houses. I used to think I was part of that world, but the more I observed, the more I realized how shallow it was. At these lunches, I'd smile and nod, pretending to care about the trivial things they discussed: who had the newest car, who had the biggest house, who had the most vacation homes. Meanwhile, my business was growing in the background, making more money than all these women's husbands combined, and none of them had a clue. When they'd ask, "How Patrick doing?" I'd always smile and say, "He's doing great as always, he's been working so hard lately." But inside, I was thinking, I'm the one working hard. I'm the one closing deals while you play golf and drink rosé. I remember the day Margaret Whitfield, one of the most well-known women at the country club, announced that her husband Richard had just made senior partner. The way she said it, so smugly, as though Richard had done all the work, as though she was the one who should be proud. Richard had probably never made a single move without her. But to her, he was the king of the world. She probably never considered how much her success came from her own marriage and status, not from any real achievements of her own. When they asked me how Patrick was doing, I'd say, "Oh, he's doing well, a lot of big meetings, a lot of deals going on." I'd keep it vague. I wasn't about to tell them that my business was pulling in more in a day than their husbands did in a month. But I was playing the part. I played it for Patrick, for the world, for everyone who assumed I was just the wife in the background. I let them believe that Patrick was the one making the money, the one who was successful. But what they didn't know was that my business, my empire, was slowly becoming a silent force that Patrick had no idea existed. The moment I knew, the decision to build. The real turning point came one night, after another dinner party where Patrick bragged about his big promotion. He went on and on about how the company was finally noticing his hard work. Meanwhile, I knew that I had just closed a deal worth $47,000 in one night, and I didn't even have to leave the house. That night, I sat in my office, staring at the email from my Vietnamese manufacturer. We were about to expand capacity. The fashion line was growing faster than I had ever imagined. And all of this was happening behind the scenes, quietly, with no one except me to acknowledge it. That was the night I decided, I'm not just going to wait for my time to come. I'm going to make it come on my own terms. I didn't need Patrick's approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was building something real, and it was mine. No one could take that from me. As Patrick and Amanda continued their affair, I started to build the pieces of my next move. I was going to show them exactly what I had built. But first, I needed to make sure everything was in place. I wasn't going to confront them yet. I had plans. Big ones. The kind of plans that would make their little affair look like a joke in comparison. I hadn't planned on walking into the kitchen that morning and seeing her there, Amanda, wearing my robe, sipping my coffee, acting as if she owned the place. The audacity. I couldn't help but marvel at how comfortably she had slipped into my life, into my home, and how little Patrick seemed to care about the shift in power between us. I could have screamed. I could have thrown a fit, maybe even tried to throw her out. But that wasn't my style. No, I'd learned a long time ago that the key to winning was patience and precision. The kind of patience that only comes when you've been quietly building your empire while the world, and your husband, treats you like an afterthought. Patrick had always been too focused on himself, too wrapped up in his own importance. He never noticed the small things, like the packages arriving at our front door every day, or how I would slip away to the craft corner while he attended yet another business dinner. But I was done playing the invisible wife. Amanda, however, was playing her part too perfectly. I watched her, perched on the kitchen counter, the way she casually sipped my coffee, the way my silk robe draped over her shoulders. It should have made me furious, but all it did was make me smile. "Morning, Allison," Amanda greeted me, still not looking up from her phone. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She didn't care. I could see the way she tilted her head, trying to gauge my reaction, as if she were some high school queen bee sizing up the new girl in town. She wasn't expecting the smile that crept across my face. She wasn't prepared for what was coming. I didn't acknowledge her, just walked past her toward the coffee maker, as if the scene before me was nothing more than an ordinary Tuesday morning. Patrick entered behind me, looking every bit the part of the corporate powerhouse, already in his crisp suit, adjusting his tie as if he hadn't just spent the last few months in the arms of my husband's mistress. He was already getting to work, calm, collected, and a little too confident. "Hey, you're back," he said, almost too casually. "We need to talk." I froze in place, holding my coffee mug. "We need to talk." Those words, so often used in marriages to signal the beginning of something that changes everything. But today, those words would mean something different. I turned to face him, my expression calm and collected. "I'm listening." "We need to discuss the new arrangement," Patrick said, like we were having a boardroom discussion. "Amanda and I have decided to move forward. We're starting a new chapter." The words stung, but only for a moment. I could see Amanda shift in my robe, as though she were awaiting my reaction, already rehearsing how she'd present herself as the new woman of the house. She might have thought she was winning, but she couldn't have been more wrong. "I'm going to give you two options," Patrick continued. His voice was measured, like he was explaining a business deal to a junior associate. "You can accept the situation. Amanda will be living here and we'll make it work like civilized adults. Or you can leave with nothing." I could feel the heat rise in my chest. "With nothing," I repeated, tasting the word. "Is that really how this works?" Patrick nodded, his eyes cold. He hadn't even considered that there was another way, a way in which I would be the one to hold the cards. I smiled. It was a smile he didn't recognize, one that had been years in the making. The kind of smile that comes from knowing you have the power, knowing you've played the long game, and that everything is about to change. "No," I said softly. "I'll need 48 hours." Patrick's brow furrowed. 48 hours. "That's all you have," I answered calmly, turning away from him. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was calm, measured, in control. And I was about to dismantle everything they thought was theirs. The calm before the storm. The 48 hours they had given me felt like a gift. I had everything in place already. I had been planning this for months. Patrick thought I was a fool, but the truth was, I had known about the affair for far longer than he thought. I had just been waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. And now the time had come. I had to be strategic. Confronting Patrick and Amanda right away would have been too simple, too easy. No, I was going to make them feel the consequences of their actions slowly, carefully, until they realized they had lost everything without even knowing it. The first step was simple. I called Marcus, my attorney, the one who had been quietly documenting everything for months. Every purchase Patrick had made, every signature he had thought he'd gotten away with, every transaction. My business was entirely separate from our marriage, and I had made sure of it. Marcus and I had a system. He was ready to execute the plan at the right moment, and the moment was now. A quiet victory. The next few hours were surreal. Patrick and Amanda were oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. They walked around the house, making plans for their new life together, their voices carrying through the halls. Amanda was already talking about redecorating, about making the house their home. It was almost laughable. They had no idea what was coming. While they played their little game, I was quietly preparing mine. I wasn't packing my bags. I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging him to stay. I was preparing for the end of their fantasy. And it wasn't just the legal documents I was putting in place. I was already starting the process of moving my business assets into my own name, every machine, every contract, every dollar. It was mine, all of it. Patrick's name was nowhere on any of it. The sweet irony of the whole situation was that Patrick thought he had all the power, that his name on the mortgage and his title as the successful one meant everything. What he didn't know was that I had built this life. Every asset, every piece of property, every business deal had been carefully crafted, all while he was too busy basking in the illusion of success. The confrontation, a moment of truth. As the day drew to a close, I knew it was time for the next step. Patrick had sent Amanda off to get some air, clearly thinking I was packing my things and preparing to leave, just like he had planned. But what he didn't realize was that I was just getting started. I walked downstairs, calm and collected, to find Amanda sitting at the kitchen counter, idly scrolling through her phone, unaware of the shift that had taken place in the last few hours. Patrick was nowhere to be found. I wasn't going to wait any longer. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "It's happening," I said, my voice steady. "We're moving forward tonight." Marcus replied with his usual calm professionalism. "Everything is set. Diana's team will begin the extraction. They won't know what hit them." I hung up, taking a long breath. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of all my hard work, everything I had built, finally coming together. Patrick and Amanda would have no idea what was coming. The 48-hour clock was ticking. In the next few hours, everything would change for Patrick and Amanda. They thought they had the upper hand, but they were about to learn the hard way that nothing they had was actually theirs. As I walked back to my office, I felt a deep sense of calm. I was in control. I had been preparing for this moment for years, and now everything was about to unfold. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, I had already set my plan in motion. Patrick and Amanda were oblivious to what was happening behind the scenes. They still thought they had time. Time to make their new life in my house. Time to rearrange the furniture, talk about their plans for the future, and make themselves comfortable in a space they didn't own. I had let them have their moment. I had let them believe they were winning, but they were about to see the truth. The movers were on their way, and Diana's team was already preparing to extract the assets that Patrick had no idea were already mine. It was all coming together, piece by piece. Patrick would wake up in 48 hours to a life that had disappeared. Everything he thought he had would be gone. But it wasn't just the financial victory I was after. It was the emotional release, the quiet strength of reclaiming what was always mine. All these years, Patrick had thought I was the one who needed him, his career, his status, his success. What he didn't know was that I had been quietly building something that was far more powerful than anything he could ever achieve. The first move, taking control. I hadn't told Patrick anything. I had kept my cool, kept my silence, kept my power to myself. But as the clock ticked down, I knew it was time to make the first real move. I walked into the living room where they were lounging, planning their future together. Amanda was flipping through a design magazine, probably picking out new paint colors, while Patrick was on his phone, checking emails, like everything was perfectly normal. "Hey," I said, cutting through the conversation like a knife. "I think it's time we talk about something." Patrick glanced up, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. "What's going on, Allison?" "Oh, nothing much," I replied coolly. "Just wanted to let you know that I've made a few arrangements." Amanda looked up then, her expression shifting slightly, but not enough to suggest she was worried. She probably thought I was still playing the victim, the wife who would quietly pack her things and disappear into the background. But I wasn't going anywhere. "Arrangements," Patrick repeated, looking at me with that condescending smile. "What kind of arrangements?" I smiled back, that same smile I had worn earlier when I walked into the kitchen to find Amanda in my robe. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of quiet confidence. "You'll find out soon enough," I said, and before he could ask any more questions, I turned and walked upstairs to my office. The moment of truth, the movers arrive. The movers arrived exactly on time. They were discreet, efficient, and professional, just as I had instructed. They came in with dollies and blankets, ready to begin the process of removing everything that mattered from the house. I wasn't sure what I expected, whether Patrick would burst in and try to stop them, or if Amanda would start demanding answers. But when I heard the heavy thud of boxes being lifted and doors opening downstairs, I knew the clock had started ticking for them. I stood in the doorway of my office, listening as the movers made their way through the house. It was strange, watching it happen, watching everything that had once been ours, or so I thought, being taken away, one box at a time. Patrick had always assumed that the house, the cars, the art on the walls, everything was his, but none of it was. It was all mine, and I was taking it back. The showdown, Patrick's realization. I didn't wait for them to come to me. I knew they would eventually catch on to what was happening. But when Patrick finally descended the stairs to confront me, I could see the confusion in his eyes. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice rising in frustration. "Why are they taking everything?" I crossed my arms and waited for a moment, letting the silence stretch between us. He was still in the dark, still too arrogant to see that everything was slipping through his fingers. "Business equipment removal," I said, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "Everything in the garage and pool house needs to be moved to the new facility. It's company property, not personal." He blinked, his face flushing with confusion. "What are you talking about? This is ridiculous." I followed him as he walked toward the garage, my steps measured, deliberate. I didn't have to say a word. The movers were already at work, wrapping up machinery, equipment, and inventory that he'd walked past every day without noticing. It wasn't personal, I reminded myself. It was business. "This is a heat press," Patrick said, pointing at a large machine. "That cost $32,000. I smiled just slightly as the movers carefully wrapped it in protective blankets. "That's right. And the embroidery machine, $40,000. The digital textile printer, $60,000. All of it purchased with money from my business accounts, not yours." Patrick's face drained of color. The realization was starting to hit him, but it wasn't fully sinking in yet. He had always been so sure of himself, so sure that he was the one in control. But now, the truth was hitting him hard, and it was clear he couldn't handle it. This is excessive for personal items," he stammered, his words faltering as he watched the movers dismantle the life he thought he had built. I wasn't being petty, I was being precise. I had everything documented. Every machine, every serial number, every purchase. It was all tracked, it wasn't just some hobby. This was my business, my empire. And now, it was time for him to learn that nothing he had was ever truly his. Amanda's role in the drama. By now, Amanda had joined us in the garage, her expression still confused, but tinged with unease. She had watched everything unfold in silence, probably thinking that she was the one getting the life she wanted. But that wasn't how this was going to play out. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she looked around at the machines, the boxes, the equipment, all things she'd probably never seen before. Patrick, still reeling, tried to salvage whatever dignity he had left. "It's just Allison's hobby equipment," he muttered. "She's always been into these little projects." Amanda's face tightened as she glanced between him and me. Her eyes moved to the machines, then back to Patrick, as if she were trying to piece everything together. But she was still missing the most important part of the puzzle. I couldn't help it, I had to smile. They were so far removed from the truth, so completely blind to what was really happening. The final blow, the witnesses. At this point, the drama had gathered an audience. Mrs. Chin, our neighbor, emerged from her garden, pruning shears in hand. She had been a fixture in this neighborhood for years, someone who had seen everything and remembered it all. "Well, it looks like someone, finally getting rid of that useless man," Mrs. Chin called out, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. She wasn't holding back. Patrick froze, Amanda's face twisted with confusion. Mrs. Chin wasn't done. She stepped forward, pointing her shears toward Amanda. "Saw that girl sneaking in for months," she said, her voice full of accusation. "Using the spare key while you were gone, staying overnight when your car wasn't here. You've been busy, haven't you?" Patrick's jaw clenched. Amanda looked like she might melt into the floor, but Mrs. Chin wasn't finished. "I even took pictures, you know," she said, pulling a small USB drive from her apron pocket and handing it to me. "I thought you should know." I took the drive from her, my heart beating a little faster. This was the final piece of evidence. The evidence was in my hands, and Patrick and Amanda were standing in front of me, realizing that their little world was collapsing. The movers continued with their work, unaffected by the drama unfolding in the garage. But what would happen next? Would Patrick finally understand the truth? Would Amanda accept the consequences of her actions? The 48-hour clock was ticking down, and I could already feel the walls closing in on them. I hadn't planned for things to escalate the way they did. But then again, when you've been holding your breath for years, you don't always know how to let go without it all coming out at once. The scene in the garage unfolded faster than I anticipated. Patrick was still in shock, trying to process everything that was happening to him. Amanda was clutching at whatever semblance of confidence she had left, but even she could see the writing on the wall. Then the explosion happened. "You think you can just take everything?" Patrick's voice was suddenly hoarse, rising to a level I'd never heard before. The condescension was gone, replaced by a raw desperation. He didn't understand. He couldn't. I was watching him unravel. But what happened next wasn't planned. It was the moment everything shifted, the moment I realized that my quiet, calculated plans would take an unexpected toll. Patrick lunged. He didn't grab me, no, he wasn't that foolish. But his desperation boiled over, and before I could react, he slammed his fist against the wall. The sound was jarring, the echo of bone against drywall, as my heart skipped a beat. I felt my stomach twist as the force behind it caused the fragile balance in the room to crack. Patrick's hand was bleeding. "Patrick, stop," Amanda cried, stepping back. She had never seen him like this before. She had never seen him this out of control. But the damage was done. As Patrick stumbled backward, his hand clutching his bleeding knuckles, I took a step forward. "I'm calling the police," I said, my voice steady. "You're not going to get away with this." The physical cost. In the chaos, I hadn't realized how much I was still shaking. I don't know if it was from anger, from fear, or from the sudden rush of adrenaline, but as I turned to leave the garage and call for help, the pain hit. It was a sharp sting, a searing pain in my side. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't want to admit it, didn't want to show any vulnerability. But it was too late. My body betrayed me. I stumbled back, nearly collapsing on the floor. It felt like someone had driven a knife into my ribs. Patrick and Amanda's frantic voices faded as my world shifted out of focus. I couldn't keep my balance. I felt dizzy, lightheaded, and before I knew it, the world around me spun and blacked out. The hospital. When I woke up, it wasn't in the house, and it wasn't with Patrick. I was in a sterile white hospital room, the smell of antiseptic and faint floral scents mixing in the air. My side throbbed with pain, and the dizziness hadn't quite passed. A nurse was standing over me, checking the IV drip attached to my arm. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked softly, her eyes full of concern. I nodded, trying to push the panic down. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I wasn't sure I'd ever be fine again. The doctor came in soon after, his face impassive. He explained that I had sustained a serious blow, but fortunately nothing was broken. The X-rays had shown signs of a possible internal injury, but they weren't severe. I had bruised ribs, a few cuts from the wall, and a deep contusion on my side. They bandaged me up and told me to rest, but I wasn't in the mood for rest. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out, my hand shaking as I unlocked it. It was Marcus, my attorney, the one person who had been with me every step of the way. He had been the one to help me structure my business to be legally separate from Patrick, to ensure my assets were protected. And now, he was the one who was going to help me finish what I'd started. The message was short, but it sent a chill down my spine. "Everything is in motion. The paperwork for the LLC transfer is ready. We'll proceed when you're able." I looked at the screen and smiled faintly. I wasn't going to let this set me back. Patrick and Amanda had crossed a line. Now, it was time for them to face the consequences. The turning point. As the nurse checked my vitals again, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Patrick had no idea what he was about to lose. He thought he had me cornered, thought he could use his position of power to dictate the terms of our life. But everything he thought was his, the house, the cars, the money, wasn't. It had always been mine. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past that. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. The reality of what I had to do began to sink in. Patrick and Amanda thought they were starting a new life together, but they hadn't even begun to comprehend what they had lost. I was going to make sure they never forgot it. The evidence, what was in the documents. Marcus wasn't just my lawyer, he was my ally. Over the past few months, he had been collecting all the evidence I needed. The emails from Patrick, the transfers of assets to Amanda, the contracts that showed I had been the one bringing in the money, all of it was meticulously documented. The evidence wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was the betrayal that had been happening behind my back, with my husband and my supposed friend. But more than that, it was the quiet theft of my life. The money, the property, everything they thought they'd claimed for themselves, it was all going to come crashing down. I had made sure to keep everything in separate accounts, in separate legal entities. That was something Patrick would never have thought to check, too busy as he was with his own arrogance. His signature was on documents, but his lack of attention to detail meant that everything was still under my name, under my control. In a way, this was the final piece of the puzzle. I had made my own way while he took all the credit. And now, I was going to take back what was mine. As the hospital doors swung open, Marcus stepped into the room, briefcase in hand. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The game was over. He didn't need to say anything, I already knew. "Are you ready to finish this?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with purpose. I nodded, sitting up in the bed, ignoring the pain in my side. This was it. It was time to take back my life, to show Patrick and Amanda exactly what they had underestimated. "Let's do it," I said, my voice steady. "Let's finish this." The minutes stretched into hours as I lay in the sterile hospital room, trying to process everything that had happened. My ribs ached from the bruising, my mind still buzzing with the adrenaline of the last few days. It wasn't the physical pain that was the hardest to endure, it was the emotional toll. How had everything gotten this far? Patrick and Amanda still didn't know the full extent of what was happening. They thought I was defeated, laying in a hospital bed with my world falling apart. But they were wrong. The truth was, everything I had been building in silence, everything they thought they had taken from me, was still mine, and it was about to come crashing down on them. As I stared out the hospital window, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about the revenge anymore. It was about the truth, about standing up for myself, for my work, for my value as a person, not just as Patrick's wife or Amanda's rival. I wasn't just fighting for control over assets or for my empire. I was fighting for my identity. The woman I had quietly built into something strong, something real, was finally ready to rise to the surface. The phone call, a friend becomes an ally. Marcus had been a quiet presence in the background of this entire journey. He had been my confidant, my strategist, and my legal backbone for months. But there was someone else in this equation, someone who had been even closer to Patrick than I had realized. Someone who had witnessed everything and was now ready to speak the truth. Kelly, Patrick's assistant, had always been a fixture in his life, but she'd never been anything more than a shadow, quietly managing his calendar, booking his travel, keeping his secrets. That was, until the night she texted me. The message from Kelly came just hours after Patrick had punched the wall, after the chaos had finally started to unwind. It was a simple message, but it was the catalyst for everything that would follow. "I know what's happening. I've been covering for him. I can't do this anymore. You need to know everything." At first, I thought it was a trap. I had spent months gathering information, but could I trust her? Could I trust anyone in this web of lies? Still, something in me knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when everything would start to unravel. I called her back immediately. The confession, Kelly's truth. Kelly's voice on the other end of the line was shaky, filled with the weight of the guilt she had carried for months. It was hard to believe, but she wasn't just an innocent bystander. She had been an active participant in Patrick's deception. "I've been booking the dinners, the hotels, all of it," Kelly confessed. "He told me to keep everything from you, keep it all off the family accounts. I used his personal card, hid the charges from you, and even forwarded emails to Amanda about exit strategies." The blood drained from my face as I listened. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just Patrick cheating on me. This was a conspiracy, an entire network of lies designed to separate me from everything I had worked for. Patrick had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. But why? I asked, my voice cold. Why help him do all this? Kelly was silent for a moment, the weight of her betrayal heavy in the air. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because he made me feel important. He made me feel like I mattered. I thought he was helping me, making me a part of something bigger. But I see now. I see what he's done to you, to all of us. She was crying, but I wasn't angry. I wasn't even upset. I was just numb. This wasn't a confession from a friend. It was a realization that the person I thought I could trust had been just as complicit in my downfall as Patrick himself. But as much as it hurt to hear the truth, I knew it was necessary. The only way to truly tear down the walls of deception was to expose every part of it. And now, I had Kelly's confession to back up everything I had suspected. You've helped me more than you know, I told her, the words slipping out without thought. I need everything you have. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence. You can't hide behind him anymore. The turning point, a family's disintegration. The following morning, I sat in my office, my laptop open in front of me, scrolling through the files Kelly had sent me. Each document, each email, revealed more about Patrick's intricate web of lies. But it wasn't just the affair. It was the financial deception, the way he had siphoned money from our shared accounts into separate ones, the way he had manipulated not just me, but his entire team. What he didn't know was that I had already been one step ahead. I had structured my business in such a way that it couldn't be touched. The LLCs, the separate accounts, the intellectual property, all of it was protected. Patrick had no claim over any of it. But now, I had the evidence, the smoking gun that would end this farce once and for all. It was time to make the call. It was time to confront him, face to face. The confrontation, Patrick's world comes crashing down. When Patrick walked into my office that afternoon, he looked the same. Suit pressed, hair perfect, confidence high. He had no idea that the world he had so carefully constructed was about to crumble beneath him. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Sit down, I said, my voice firm. Patrick raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated. What's this all about? I opened the file on my desk, the one that contained Kelly's confession, the emails, the receipts. I slammed it down in front of him. This is what it's about, I said quietly. This is everything you've been hiding from me, everything you've been hiding from everyone. His face went white as he glanced at the documents. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, the arrogance returned. You're not going to get away with this, Allison. You're just a bitter woman who can't accept the truth. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. The truth, you're the one who's been lying for months, and now you've taken everything from me. But what you didn't realize is that I've been preparing. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Patrick's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for the truth. I leaned in, watching as his world started to crumble. You've lost, Patrick. Everything you thought was yours was never yours to begin with. As Patrick stood there, silent and defeated, Amanda appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She must have heard the commotion, but now, she was standing in the middle of the battlefield. I don't understand, Amanda said, her voice trembling. What's going on? I turned to her, my gaze cool and steady. You've been played too, Amanda, just like everyone else. Everything you thought you had, every piece of control you thought you wielded gone, in a matter of hours. Patrick looked between us, his face twisted in disbelief. No, this can't be happening. But it was, and there was no turning back now. The confrontation had been inevitable. Patrick, standing there in the office with his mouth gaping open like he couldn't process the truth, was a sight I never thought I'd see. And Amanda, the woman who had slunk into my life with her stolen moments and quiet claims to my husband, was still standing there, wide-eyed and unsure. Patrick looked between us, disbelief still written all over his face. No, this can't be real, you're lying. I shook my head. You're the one who's been lying to everyone, Patrick. You thought you could control everything, me, our lives, even Amanda. but in the end, it was all built on your lies. Amanda stepped forward, her face pale, her eyes darting between the evidence in front of her and Patrick. Patrick, what is all this? She whispered, her voice trembling now. I don't understand. You said everything was yours. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment as I watched them fall apart. Patrick was right where I wanted him, confused, panicked, and desperate. He had built his entire identity around the idea of being the successful one, the one everyone envied. But in reality, it had always been me. I had been the one quietly building my business, making the hard decisions, working day and night to ensure that I had something that no one could take from me. And now, it was all about to come crumbling down for him. I turned to Marcus, who had silently observed the scene from the corner of the room. He gave me a brief nod, confirming that everything was in place. The paperwork was ready. The eviction notices had been issued. The transfer of assets was complete. Patrick and Amanda had no idea what was coming next. The aftermath, the eviction and the fallout. By the time Patrick and Amanda had processed everything, they were no longer in control. The next morning, a moving company arrived, and with it, the harsh reality of their situation set in. Patrick's face was pale as the movers started unloading the expensive furniture, art, and anything of value from the house. They were taking it all, my things, things I had earned and things I had paid for. But now it was going into storage, to be held under my name, under my control. Where are you taking all of this? Patrick demanded, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. To the new facility, I said, my voice calm. This is all business property now. You've already had your chance to claim ownership of it, but it turns out, it was never yours to begin with. His face twisted with frustration. You can't do this. Oh, I can, I replied, and I already have. As he watched everything he thought was his get loaded onto the trucks, I could see the realization slowly settle over him. The house he thought was his, the life he thought he controlled, it was all slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. A change of heart, therapy and accountability. In the days that followed, the fallout from the confrontation continued. Patrick's career was in jeopardy. His firm had conducted an internal investigation after the discovery of the embezzled funds, and now, he was facing not just legal repercussions, but professional ruin. The whispers behind closed doors were already beginning. His pride had been his downfall. Amanda, on the other hand, was facing an entirely different crisis. The Instagram posts, the videos she had so carefully curated, were now the subject of scorn and ridicule. Her follower count had dropped by thousands overnight as the truth came out. The betrayal that she had tried to build her life on now hung around her like a heavy chain. I watched all of it happen, but I wasn't angry anymore. I had already moved on from the anger. What I saw in both of them wasn't just guilt, it was the recognition that they had been players in a game they never truly understood. Patrick and Amanda had built their lives on lies, and now, they were paying the price for it. I didn't reach out to either of them after the chaos settled. I didn't need to. They had already shown me who they were, and I wasn't interested in trying to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. But the real turning point for me, something that truly changed everything, was when I sought help. I began therapy not long after everything unraveled. I had spent years hiding parts of myself, suppressing the feelings of being undervalued, neglected, and betrayed. Therapy wasn't just about healing from the scars Patrick and Amanda had left behind, it was about finally learning to value myself. To understand that I wasn't just someone's wife, someone's business partner, or someone's victim, I was my own person. I had the strength to stand on my own, to rebuild, and to thrive. Rebuilding my life, from the ashes. The weeks that followed were filled with challenges. It wasn't easy to navigate the aftermath of everything that had happened. The media buzzed with news of Patrick's downfall, and Amanda, once a rising influencer, was now struggling to salvage what little credibility she had left. But for me, it was a chance to rebuild, not just my empire but my life. I threw myself into my business, and slowly the work I had poured my heart and soul into began to grow once more. I didn't just focus on sales or expansion, I focused on my team, on the women who had supported me along the way. My sustainable fashion line, once a small passion project, now had international partnerships and was beginning to hit new markets. I began mentoring young women entrepreneurs, giving back in ways I had never imagined. The journey that started as a quiet rebellion against Patrick's control had now evolved into something far greater, something that empowered others. And through it all, my company's value grew. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the legacy I was building, the empire I had created from the ground up, and the lesson I had learned from all of this. You don't need anyone's permission to build something powerful. The final lesson, a scar left behind. In the end, everything had changed. Patrick was no longer a part of my life. Amanda had disappeared from the scene, her dreams shattered by her own choices. But there was one thing that remained, a scar. It wasn't just the bruises I had from that night or the emotional toll it took. It was the reminder that betrayal can be brutal, but it doesn't have to define you. That scar would always remind me of how far I had come and how much I had built in silence. It was a reminder that sometimes, it takes the worst betrayal to truly discover who you are and what you're capable of. 6 months later, I was standing in front of a new building, one that had just been purchased for my company's next big project. The Graham Center was opening its doors to young women entrepreneurs, offering them the resources, mentorship, and support they needed to build their own empires. Patrick had no idea what he had set in motion when he chose Amanda over me. He thought he was the one in control, but he had underestimated me. And now, the women he had ignored, the ones he had dismissed, were the ones who were truly building something real. I smiled as I walked through the doors of the new center. This was only the beginning.